make sure I know how to do it.
This week we're learning Parshos Acharei Mos. This year we learn it 3 times. The Chumash is learned for 3 weeks. In the Hagada, it says, Omar Belezer ben Azariah, Harei ani kiven shivim shana. I was like the age of 70, v'lo zachisi. I was not zoiche, shetoma etzis Yitzrayim alelos. I wasn't zoiche to bring a proof to my opinion. His opinion was that you have to mention the miracle of Yitzis Mitzrayim not only by day but also by night. So what does it mean? Kiven shivim shana. Like, was he 70 or was he not 70? So the Gemara says in Parshos Daf Chav Zayin that he wasn't 70. How old was he?
17.
17. Another Gersa Yerushalmi is 16.
60.
And the Gemara tells the whole story. We'll talk about this soon. The Gemara tells the story about it. So the question is, it's like your little child will say, you know, I've been working for a long time. I don't know what I do. I still didn't make my first $1 million. You're in 10th grade. What are you talking about? He said, I'm 16 years old. I've been living for 16 years, and I still wasn't Zeichet to prove my point against Chachamim until Ben Zayma came along. Wow. Wow. What can this? If he was really 70, I understand that he'd said that I'm 70 years old. I've been searching for 70 years for a raya, for my pshita. Finally, Ben Zayma came. He saved the day.
He's amazing Ilui.
Okay, but what does it mean? It's okay, fine. So say Harei ani Ilui Godel, ve'otzum beyoser, umasmed Godel. But what does it mean? Harei ani kiven shivim shana. But you were only 17.
Maybe he has a seichel of maybe he's matured like a 70-year-old man.
Okay.
Or maybe his beard was white already.
Okay.
Now you're talking.
So okay. She say, "Harei yesh li zaken lavan."
When is zaken? Kiven shivim.
And what is it going to help that he has a white beard now? So now that
he has wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
He has more respect.
More respect, more wisdom. Notoriety.
Let's look at the first Rashi.
It's about the Sheteretz, right?
V'daber Hashem Moshe Acharei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron B'kor Avosam Lifnei Hashem V'Yemusu is the first pasuk. Pasuk in the first pasuk in Parshos Acharei Mos. It's on page Kuf Chaf Daled in the Chitas. So the Eibusha spoke to Moshe after the 2 sons of Aaron died, as they entered close in front of Hashem, and they died. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, the Eibusha said to Moshe, Daber al Aaron, speak to Aaron your brother. You shouldn't go enter at any time into the Kodesh, lest he'll die.
They were intoxicated.
The whole complicated thing. Why did they enter? Did they enter because they were intoxicated? But they went in and they did a Kodesh. So he said, don't do the same as they did. Don't go in without authorization. B'chol eis. Don't go in any day of the year with a Ketores. You could die like they died. Only be'onan, only come in with the cloud of the Ketores once a year on Yom Kippur. Bezois yavi Aaron ala kodesh. This is the rule of how we should enter once a year. The parvim boker lachatas va'ilo oiluk says was kodesh yilbush, and the Pakasa continues give exact instructions on how to enter the kodesh hakadoshim and when to enter the kodesh hakadoshim on the 1 day a year that he did so, which is in Yom Kippur.
So why didn't he have these instructions before? Why is instructions given after the tragedy?
This is right after this tragedy.
Yeah,
this is Rosh Chodesh Nisan.
Yeah, but why couldn't they give the instructions
before?
Before
they died. He said.
Before they died.
Before this, why
didn't they know about this? Before.
Good question.
We can't cover the whole Tula in one night. Well, let's try to cover this Rashi.
No, right, forget it. I'm just saying. I'm just wondering, why was he give instructions after the whole thing? Maybe probably she should have all the dinim and all the instructions before, and then
Actually, I have an answer for your question.
all right, later.
We'll talk about it soon.
Yeah.
Medaber Hashem al Moshe, Acharei Mos neben Aaron. So Rashi says, "Mat hamol loimer."
What are we still reading now?
The first Rashi. Mat Talmud loimer. What is he trying to tell us? In other words, the Pashut Pshat and the question is, why is it important to know when the Eibusha spoke? Acharei Mos neben Aaron. Why is it important to know that it was Acharei Mos neben Aaron? And if it was before Moshe neben Aaron, why is it so important to know when he spoke? First Rashi, first line. Mat Talmud loimer. There's another girsa, which clearly it's not Rashi. Let's skip that. Hoyer Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Moishle. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gave a moshel to answer this question. Moshel lechoyle, a parable of a sick man. Shenichnas etzlei roife, the doctor came to visit him. Those were the good old days when the doctors would come visit you at a house. Not when you went to the office and you could wait there till the chalish and they'll come take you with the atzola, and then you can wait in the emergency room.
All day, all night.
Yeah.
Come home 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. No, those were the old days. The Roifa came to visit you. Remember Dr. Zelikson? Any remember? There was an old doctor. The Rebbe's doctor.
Lubavitcher is on Eastern Parkway, down an older person. Zelikson.
So my great-grandmother, I went to visit her once when I was a boy after camp.
Grandmother?
Yeah.
That goes back.
At that time, she was at 98, 97, 98. That was so I wasn't feeling well. So she didn't call my mother or anything. She'll take care of everything herself. So she put me in the bed, she covered me, and then she went to her neighbor. The neighbor was Dr. Zelikson. So Dr. Zelikson came to visit to take care of me. It was like a sight. My great-grandmother's 98, and Dr. Zelikson came. I don't know, he seemed like an angel, Dr. Zelikson. That was a doctor. So the doctor came to visit the choyle. Amar Loi, the doctor says to the choyle, Al toichel zainen, don't eat cold food. Val tishkav betachav, don't sleep in the place which is cold and wet. Bo acher, comes a second doctor. Amar Loi, and says to the patient the same thing. Al toichel zainen, don't eat cold food. Val tishkav betachav, don't sleep in a cold place. But he adds a few words. You will not. So, in order you shouldn't die like that man. You know that guy over there on the other block. I told him the same instructions. He didn't listen, and he died. So, I tell you, don't eat this. Don't sleep there, because otherwise you'll die. The second doctor encourage the patient more than the first one. Therefore, the pasuk says, "Acharei Mos bnei Aaron." Therefore, the Torah says it's not just telling you when it happened, a piece of information when it happened. Acharei Mos bnei Aaron is that the Eibusha said that you should tell Aaron, your brother, that you should not enter the Kodesh, in order that you don't die like Nadav Avihu died. That was part of it.
It's a very strong point.
So this is not just a piece of information. The Torah says that Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, the Eibusha spoke to Moshe, and the Torah says, by the way, when did it happen? Acharei Mos bnei Aaron. No. That wasn't what happened. It's not that the Torah is giving you a piece of information, a story, a piece of information when this happened. No, this was part of the command. You should tell Aaron, your brother, he shouldn't enter at any time, so he shouldn't die like Nadav Avihu Chas v'Shalom. Next Rashi. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe daber le'Aaron achicha v'Yavashal yom es keder Hashem es bonav. There's several obvious questions in this mashal. What all the Mefarshim ask, why do you have to give a mashal of two doctors? The first doctor and the second doctor, why do you have to give so much? Just say a mashal of a doctor who told the patient that, listen, if you will do these bad behaviors, if you'll eat this type of food, you won't exercise, you'll do this and that, it won't be good for you. Why do we have to have a marshal of two doctors? That's the first and obvious question. So the Meforshim, the Maharal, and the Gurarya, and the Gurarya, and the Maskala David, many of the commentaries answer the same thing. They say Rashi's bothered by a different question. Rashi's bothered that the pasuk is repetitive. This pasuk Aleph and Beis is saying the same thing twice for no good reason. Veidaber Hashem al Moshe. The Eibush spoke to Moshe. Next pasuk, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. I mean, the pasuk is saying the same thing. Veidaber Hashem al Moshe. The Eibush spoke to Moshe. Acharei Mos ne'barav kavas v'fnei Acharei Mos. And again, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. Dabar al Lechicha. Why does it say twice? Veidaber Hashem al Moshe. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. So they say that the Eibush said, that's why Rashi is a moshel. The Eibush told him first, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. The Eibush said to Moshe, speak to Aaron, they shouldn't enter at any time. And then he sees that Aaron is not picking up the message of how serious it is. Then he told him a second time, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe, that Acharei Mos nebnei Aaron, tell him that he should listen carefully, because otherwise, chas v'sholem, he'll die. That's what a lot of the Meforshim say. But bothered Rashi is it says two psukim the same thing. Veidaber Hashem al Moshe, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, and they answered. The first comes pasuk number 2. It was the first thing. Pasuk Beis was number 1 really. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, al Yavav b'chayis l'kodesh, don't enter. And the first pasuk was the second command. He sees he's not paying attention, so he tells him like the second doctor. That's the mashal of the two doctors. Problem here is like this. When Rashi says in the words Ma Talmud Loimar, it doesn't sound like that was his question. If Rashi had a question that the pasuk is repetitive, it said something twice. So Rashi should ask that question. That's not when you say Ma Talmud Loimer. That's not the question. In the Torah, for example, this thing is brought in the Torah's Kohanim. The Torah's Kohanim has a different question, not Rashi's question. Torah's Kohanim says V'al Yavav b'chaleis l'kodesh, and he shouldn't enter. What was the first thing he said? That was the first thing. He told him, don't enter to the Kodesh at any time. V'al. And you show. What was the first thing he was supposed to say? So Torah's Kohanim answers. The first thing was, he said, don't be careful not to die like the... So, but Rashi doesn't quote the Torah's Kohanim because we know the rule that the Rebbe established, that Rashi doesn't quote a Medrash. There is the Medrash of Chazal, there's Gemara, there's Halacha, there is Drush, and Rashi is none of the above. Rashi explains the Pshat. So if the Gemara is consistent with the Pshat, that's fine, he'll quote the Gemara. If it's not consistent, he will not quote the Gemara. If it's slightly consistent, if you change the word slightly, and then it will be consistent, he'll change the words. He's not quoting Gemara from Midrashim. Rashi is giving you the Pshat. Maybe it won't be consistent according to Halacha or Drash, but that's fine, it doesn't bother Rashi.
But he knew Gemara.
He knew everything. Rashi knew it like
his address is to go to Midrash.
Sometimes Rashi says to look. Sometimes
Talks very nice about this subject.
Right. Sometimes. And why? Because sometimes it's clear that the Torah wants you to look at the Medrash. Like in Parshos Hazinu. It's a poem. A poem is supposed to have deeper meaning, right? There's not... The pshat of poem is already deeper than the pshat of regular pshat of a story. So that's why, and sometimes there's different things in the Torah, but the Torah makes it clear that over here there is something deeper to it. But otherwise Rashi goes with pshat. So Rashi doesn't have the question of the Torah's Kohanim. Rashi just said, Ma Talmud Loimer. Why do I have to know when the Eibishter spoke to Moshe and to Aaron? It was a day after the sons died, and if it was a week later, why is it relevant? That was the question. Not, and the truth is, it doesn't bother Rashi that it says twice, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe and Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. Why doesn't it bother Rashi? Because in Pshat, this is not a question. This is not a question of Pshat. We know already Rashi had set a rule earlier. Rashi set a rule. For example, it said when the Eibishter had a conversation with Moshe Rabbeinu that he should go redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. So it says, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer Ani Hashem. Daber al pari melech Mitzrayim es kol shani doiver elecha. Vayomer Moshe lifnei Hashem ani raltz v'sayim. I can't speak. So Rashi says, hey, wait a minute. If you look 20 psukim earlier, they had the same conversation exactly. 20 psukim earlier, it says, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe, go to pari. Vayedaber Moshe ich shmayini pari ani raltz v'sayim. Same conversation, just 20 psukim apart, the same things. How do you have the same conversation twice? only 20 psukim apart. So Rashi says a rule. He says that this is the way it works. Hi amida shamar lamayla. These two psukim here are the same two psukim as 20 psukim ago. V'shona akos of kivish shehifseko inyan. V'kach hi ashita. Ke'odam ha'omer nachzel al harishonos. Kach hi ashita. That's the polite way of speaking. If I spoke to you about something and then I went off on a tangent, and then I have to bring it back, right? I have to bring it back to where we're holding.
You have to repeat the same thing in order to bring it back?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
I know, it was just I was once at the Shluchim convention, and I happened to step in to a session where there was about giving shurim, oratory, and so there was a Rov in South Africa. I remember just this motion was a cute thing. So he said that sometimes you go off on a tangent. You tell a story to illustrate your point. You give a joke, and he says it's very important sometimes to recap where you were holding in your thoughts. So he gave this mashal. You know, you're telling you're learning a deep thing, and you want to give a mashal. So you say, oh, once a father went with his son on a rowboat. They went out in the river. He threw out the thing, the bait and the hook. He threw out the line, and they went and they're sitting there and they're fishing. And then all of a sudden, so the answer of Rashi, people are still on the boat, and their head is still in the fishing. They're thinking about the boy and the father, the fish. All of a sudden, there's a tug at them. They're still on the boat. You have to bring them back to the Beis Medrash and bring them back to the Rashi. Otherwise, you lost half the Olam. So, Kach Yashita, Rashi says, that's the way it works. If the Eibishter had a conversation, he says, Moshe Rabbeinu, please do me a favor. You deliver the Jews out of Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, Rabbeinu Shalom, I can't do that. Party won't listen to me. And then the Eibishter says a whole thing about the Yichus. Then the 20 psukim talking about the Yichus of the Eila Roshei Beis Avoisam. And then the Torah wants to go back to that conversation. So in the Gemara would never would go for such a thing. What do you mean, 2 extra psukim? Every word in the Torah, you learn Tilei Tilim Shel Halachas. Mountains of halachas from every ois v'koitz, from every letter and every little stick on a letter. But in Pshat, there's not a question. The Eibishter said, go to Paro. He said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. Then the Rebbeinu Shalom went into a whole conversation, 20 psukim, and now we have to, he's still with the boy on the boat in the middle of the lake. You got to bring him back to the story here. So the Eibishter recaps again. He says, so the Eibishter gives another 2 psukim. He says, back to the story. I spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, please deliver the Yidden. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I can't do it. And then what the Eibishter responds to that. So that Kach Yashita, that's the way it works. In Pshat, in Gemara would never go for such a thing. In Medrash would never go for such a thing. In Pshat, this is not a question. Why does it say Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe? Vayomer Hashem. Why? Because it says Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe. They spoke to Moshe. Acharei Mos shnei bnei Aram. After the 2 sons of Aaron died. Why did they die? Because they came close to the Eibishter and they died. What should it say now? He went off on a tangent. Eibishter spoke to Moshe, and it tells you when and what happened.
There's 2 different subjects.
Right, so we have to bring it back to recap. So that's why it says again, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. By the way, we're talking in the middle of this conversation. In Pshat, this is not a question why it says Vayedaber and Vayomer. And that's why Rashi doesn't ask it. He just says Matal Maloimer. Rashi is saying, why is it important to know that they spoke after the B'shnei B'Aram passed away? Also, this whole thing doesn't fit in Pshat. The pasuk number 1 is the second command. Pasuk number 2 is the first command. Right? They said first the Eibishter said, don't enter at any time. The second, and the CC said he's not listening. He said the second time, but like the second doctor who says you're gonna die, but the first pasuk says you're gonna die. So this is just this whole pshat sits very poorly in pshat.
But how we can think that Aharon did not listen? Aharon Avinu.
What to say? Very good question. So that's what we're going to talk about. So therefore, back to our first question. So these Mefarshim, it doesn't sit well in the Rebbe's understanding of Rashi. Why would you have to say a mashal of 2 doctors? So they say because the question was two psukim, Vaydaben and Vayomer. The Rebbe says, according to Pshat, that's not a question. And obviously Rashi was never bothered by it, and if it was bothered, he would explain it to you, and that's it. So we're back to the original question, why do we need a mashal of two doctors? And another few questions. Why do we need a mashal? A mashal is something very deep. It's hard to understand. Why can't you just tell me? The Eibishter said, what's so deep here that we need a mashal? And if we need a mashal, why do we need a mashal from a sick person? Only sick people go to doctors? Have you never heard of an annual visit? So you go to a doctor.
People died over
and if the doctor sees you a couple of pounds extra, so he gives you a little bit of musar.
Over here, we're talking about people died over here. Not Mavil, his sons died.
They died, but Adam didn't die.
No, he didn't die, but he's warning you. If you don't listen to me,
why
you'll
can't
die
it be like okay? So the centers of disease control say there's a big thing called the Zika virus, and you should be very careful. There's the Ebola. Why they say if you're gonna go to Africa, so don't shake the people their hand, and if you shake their hand, don't lick your hand. You'll come back here with Ebola. Do you have to be sick to get that instruction?
No.
Adam B'chlal and Torah, we try to make, even a human being, if you try to make a moshel, you don't try to just shoot the story out in the air and then try to later figure out how to connect it. You try to, you want to explain something, especially in Torah.
Simplifies it.
Right.
Without a mushel,
so why do you have to start telling me a story with a choila? So I have to start thinking, maybe in the Nimshal, maybe Adam was a little bit of a choila. Just tell me a story. There was a man. He was 50 years old. He came for his annual. The day he went on the scale, the doctor said, Yankele, you had a few pieces too much kugel.
That's it.
And you know what? It's not healthy. So why do we have to tell you a story of a choila? Another question. If we already told you a story of a choila, why do we need two instructions? And why it's specifically this, don't eat cold food, don't drink cold... And why do we say the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Rashi, we know, never tells you the name of the Baal HaMemra unless it will a little bit explain something. It'll answer something. So what is it? So the Rebbe's pshat is like this. What's bothersome here in the Pasuk is not just why the Torah tells us that this story happened, Acharei Mos nebnei Aaron. The Eibishter gives him many commands. It doesn't say what the punishment is. Even if the Eibishter says what the punishment is. But it's never in this way. Kederech shemeis ploini. I'll give you an example. Don't do this because the punishment is that. And that, the other guy, that's not the shita. It's not usually the way the Torah speaks. So why is it? And even here, the story of Nadav Avihu was that for whatever reason they went in for the Torah. So they went and they were intoxicated. So when the Torah said earlier, don't go in, that a person shouldn't go in, that the Eibishter spoke to Aaron that he shouldn't go in after he drinks wine, yayin v'sheichor. So it doesn't say, it says v'loy samusu. It doesn't say v'loy samusu kederach shemeisu nadav avihu. And that was already an earlier pasuk. The Eibishter had warned them not to drink wine, yayin v'sheichor. V'loy tamusu. The Torah doesn't say v'loy tamusu kederach nadav avihu. So what? That's what's bothering Rashi. So what's the answer? The Gemara says that people that are sick, they have no appetite to eat. Now, the truth is, you don't need the Gemara and Yevamos to tell you that. Because that's, and it's a pasuk in Tehillim. Right? It's a pasuk Tehillim. You say it every Friday. Chassidim say, Kuf Zayin and Tehillim. Kol oichel tis'ayev nafsham. Person who's sick has no appetite to eat. That's just the way it is. Right? Come on, it's not a person sick for a little bit, you lose a couple of pounds. So what happens? The Gemara says an interesting thing. The Gemara says in Yevamos, Ishte zinte. Zinte ashose. That the fire of the high temperature feeds the person. That's why a regular person's temperature is lower. So to higher the temperature a person eats, that gives him, you get warmed up when you have to eat. A person's cold. If you're hungry, you get cool. Then you eat, you get warmed up. Mm-hmm. But the person who's sick doesn't need to eat because he's already hot anyway. That's what the Gemara says. I'm not sure how it works scientifically or not, but that's the Gemara in Yevamos. Mm-hmm. So b'meila, what happens? A person is burning in fever. He's hot. He's a choila. Most people sick there. They have heat fever. So what happens when a person's hot? Very, very hot. What do you want when you're hot?
To cool down.
Something cool down. So there's two ways to cool down. One is to walk into a refrigerator, or the other thing is to eat ice, right? There's two ways to cool down. So like this. We're talking about a patient, usually he listens to the doctor's instructions. But here, he's burning in fever. The doctor says, don't eat the ice and don't walk into the freezer. So the choila says to himself, you know what, forget about it. Usually, I'm a good boy. Doctor gives instructions, I listen to him. But now, who knows? The heat is gonna. If I'm not gonna die from the cold, I'm gonna die from the heat. So never mind. Forget about the doctor. So the first doctor comes and he warns him. He doesn't listen. Second doctor sees this guy is not listening. He says, "Listen, boychik, you're playing with fire." The other guy in the other block had the same condition.
Like you.
I told him, don't eat the ice and don't sleep in the freezer. He didn't listen and he died. So don't play around. There's not a time to play shtick. What happens here? We're coming to Pesach. Pesach we read Shir Hashirim. Kechoilas Ava Ani. I'm sick of Ava to the Eibishter. We're talking about Aron HaKohen, and it's after the 7 days of Pesach, El Moyed, Teshvu, Yomam Valaylu, Shivas Yomim. They were sitting there and they saw the greatness of the Eibishter. So he has now a Choyla Ava. He is sick and a yearning with love to Hashem. So he might want to satiate that love. How is he going to satiate that love to Hashem? This is one way to do it.
Cool.
You go in to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's two ways of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. One is throughout the year. Over there, that's absolutely not permissible. Then there is on Yom Kippur that you're so excited you run into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but also that's not permissible. You have to get up in the morning, and there's a whole thing, Boker, Lachatas, and there's a whole say that avoid of how you do it till you come in. You can't just so exciting in the morning. You run, jump out of bed, and jump into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on land. So, because that's why the Moshel has. That's why the Moshel has here a story of two things. Number one, we have achila. What's achila? Korbanos is like achila. Korbani lachmi l'ishay, to eat. So he said, and this is something, and the first thing is it's more satisfying and more dangerous. The ice that goes into the choila is more, that's why it's the first thing the doctor says is al toichel tzoinen. The second thing he says al tishkav betacha, because the tzoinen is more satisfying and it's more dangerous. So the first thing is going into the kodesh at any time is very satisfying, but it's more dangerous. So that was the first thing. Al yovei b'chol eisel kodesh. If it's not Yom Kippur, forget about it. Don't. And the mashal for that is like eating the cold, because that's a mashal of because he might want to do it on a regular Thursday to go into the kodesh HaKadoshim and to eat achilas hakarbonos. She said, no, don't do that. And then the second thing is al tishka b'tachav. Tishka b'tachav means you go into the wrong place, in the wrong circumstances. It's too cold, it's too hot. The Shechina is here, and you can't just walk in. But even on Yom Kippur, unless you do the proper preparations and you come in the proper way.
Were they consumed by the holiness, the children of Aaron?
Mm-hmm. But that wasn't God's intention. The intention is that the neshama should stay and to make the world the dwelling place for Hashem. So therefore, that was the command to Aaron. Aaron, even though he was saying you're a choilas ava, that you're burning with love to Hashem. But the Eibishter said, Al yovi b'cholei sal HaKodesh. And the Eibishter wanted to be mezares him even more by adding to that command another piece of information that you should know that Nodav Avihu, they were big tzaddikim, but why did they die? Because they had such a tshuka and they did it the wrong way.
But isn't that enough for Aaron to know not to do it?
Well, a few nukudas. There's a few points here. Firstly, what the main point is like this: we assume that everyone wants to live, But the Eibishter is telling him
It was a mistake by
that this is going to be against my will. I don't want you to go into the Kodesh and to be consumed, because I want you to live. And that's going to be against what my will is. Now, when it comes to Nodav Avihu, the truth is there was so many things that happened, but there's two general things. Rashi says that in the time of Matan Torah, Nistaklu vehitzitzu, they looked at God. V'nischayvu misa lamokim, el shehimtem lahem ad yom chanukas hamishkan. The Eibishter didn't want to bring, that there was the wrong time to the Eibishter waited for them, but it was coming to them anyway. Someone asked before a question, why didn't God give the command earlier? It wouldn't help. They were going to get killed for that histaklu ve'tzitzu, and it happened in a positive way. So
It's in a very rough passion, you're saying.
maybe that answers your question. But they were chayiv misa anyway. If God was going to give the command about Al Yove before they died, after they died, that's what Rashi said. For Matan Torah was nischayiv because nistaklu ve'tzitzu. They looked at the Eibishter without sunglasses. That's what Rashi says. And then
They should have known better, you're saying.
right, that was the first. And then the Eibishter waited till the day of Chanukas on Mizbeach.
They were wearing boys.
What?
No, they looked at the
Why?
Eibishter without sunglasses.
They
And
were playing with
then
fire.
the second one thing was that finally on the day of Chanukas HaMishkan, they did Vayasimu La'aktoides, Vayakrivu, they were makriv a korban, a Zora Shaloi Tziva Oisa. Why? Because they were intoxicated, maybe this and maybe that. So these were the two general things. These two things are like two things that the doctor said. Number one was that Al Yovoi B'cholei Sela Kodesh. They just they looked at the Eibishter. This was like the first thing. This is the first thing, as he says, don't eat things that are unhealthy. Don't eat these. This was like the first thing. There was, which is that they did a ketoides. They did a ketoides, which ketoides is like achila. The other thing they did was like tishka batachel. They looked at the Eibishter. Looking is not like eating. Looking at something, it's like they were in the wrong place in the wrong time. They do. So these are the two sons of the Shnei Bnei Adam, similar to these two things they were told not to eat cold food and not to sleep in a cold
But I
place.
think because Hashem moved their death for later, they saw here in the beginning with Metzitzim, nothing happened, we can do it again.
Yeah.
Hashem did not do anything to us then.
Well,
So
when
why
was
they
that?
would do later?
Right.
Well, when was then that there was no consequences?
In Mitzrayim, it said, Rashi said, Metzitzu, they look without sunglasses at Hashem.
Who?
Hashem,
Klal Yisrael.
not David
No,
Avihu.
not the Vaviu.
Hashem did not want to take them out. He said, now we're going out from Mitzrayim, it's very pressure moment, I will take care of them later. When they came here now, and they went to Beit HaMikdash, then the parish. So I'm thinking, then when they did it, they see Hashem did not do anything. So they said, let's do it again. It doesn't touch us.
Could you compare that to the giving?
It
of
wasn't when they
Torah?
it was by the giving of the Torah. It says, Vayiru Eis Elokei Yisrael, V'sachas Raglav Kemaisa Livnas Asapar Chetzim Hashemayim LaTorah, one of the most difficult psukim in the Torah. They saw God, and the Torah describes exactly what they saw. And the Rashi says, Nistaklu, they looked, Vehitzitzu, they looked very strongly. They didn't just...
So what do you expect not
They
to
weren't
look?
allowed on
Nischayvu Misa, L'shalerotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu La'ar V'simchas HaTorah, V'himte L'nodav Avihu Ad Yom Chanukas HaMishkan. That's what Rashi says.
They weren't
So-
allowed on Mount Sinai.
That was on Mount Sinai,
They
right?
weren't allowed to be
Right.
on the mountain.
Right.
Because they would have been consumed.
Right, no, but this is different. This is not
It's
the
like
being on the
can't
mountain.
compare
That was a
that.
different thing. The Rashi
But
says
still, it's the same Kedusha.
it's a different thing, but the Pasuk says that they looked. They looked. It says, Vayal Moshe v'Aaron Nod v'Aviv v'Shimon v'Zikn Yisrael Vayiru Eis Elokei Yisrael. They looked. They were not supposed to look, and they looked. So the question still remains: why would you think? Someone just asked it before. Why would we suspect that Aaron would want to do the same thing as his sons? That's why Rashi says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Why does he say Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? What was the story the Gemara says about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? The Gemara says The Mishnah says, "Arei ani keven shivim shana v'lo zachis shetomi yitzis v'tzrayim b'leilos asher darsha ben zayma." It was as though I was 70 years old. And I wasn't Zoichet to prove my point that Tzis Mitzrayim needs to be said not only by day but also by night. So the Gemara says, "What? Kiven Shivish doesn't mean like 70." The Gemara says, "Well, it wasn't 70." The one of the Talmidim asked Rabbi Yeshua if Tfilas Arvis is Reshus Chayva. So he said it was Chayva, obligated. So he came later to the base of Medrash asking Gamliel, who's then also, is it Reshus Chayva? He said Reshus. So Rabbi Yeshua told me it's a Chayva. So he said, "Wait a minute." So that when all the students entered, he said, "Okay, close the doors." He said to the one that asked the question, "Get up, ask your question again." So he asked the question again, and Gamliel said, "It's Rishus. Does anyone disagree?" So everyone was quiet. So he said, "Rabbi Yeshua, do you agree or disagree?" He said, "Agree." He said, "But they just said in your name that you disagree. Amoida raglech, stand on your feet." And then Yeshua stood up and he kept on talking, he made a light of him. He was sitting, and everyone was listening, and he's standing, like a little boy in the corner, standing and the whole people, the place was on wheels, until they told Chutzpah Turgaman that said, "Stop, stop." Stop. He would the Chochem, the Nasi would speak, and the Maturgaman would speak loud and tell everyone the words of the Nasi. Stop. The people told him, "Don't speak anymore." It was like it was a tumult in the Beis Hamedrash. There was a revolt going on. The Chacham said that we're going to kick out Rebbe Gamliel from being a Nasi. He overstepped his bounds. He already did the Rosh Hashanah, he did a whole spitzel with Rabbi Yeshua, and a story with the Bachoris with Rabbi Yeshua. Enough is enough. So they said, who should we take as the new Nasi? Rabbi Yeshua, it doesn't make sense to take Rabbi Yeshua because he was the
other side.
He's the other side. It doesn't look good. To take Rabbi Akiva, right, he doesn't have Schus Avos. So if Rabbi Gamliel is going to get upset, he doesn't have the Schus of his parents to back him. So they said, "Should we take someone else?" They said, but the government might get involved over here, with changing leadership. They won't like it. They said, Rebbe Elazar Mazai is the best choice. He is 10 generations of Ezra, and he's very rich, so if the government won't start up with him. And he's also very wise. If Rebbe Gamliel sit in the Beis Medrash and start asking questions, he'll always have a good answer. So they picked Rebbe Elazar Mazai.
But the problem is too young.
Rabbi Elazar Mazai agreed, but he said, "I have to discuss it with my wife." First thing his wife said, "Yeah, they're going to take you, and then they'll
throw you out after
they'll throw you out after that." So he said, "No, a person that uses a kois, it doesn't just break it afterwards." And then she said, "But you're too young." So he had nothing to answer. They went to bed in the morning. It was a miracle. That he grew 18 strands of white into his beard. And that's when he was established a Nasi. And it says that Gabriel had a policy that there was a guard at the door that announced that a student that is inside is not reflected in his outside. Is this truth of the inside is not reflected in the outside? Al Yakonis. Rabbi Elazar Mazai said,
"Everyone,
you go home.
No guard.
No guard." The Gemara says, "Netoisu arbe meya safsli bebeis hamedrash." They brought in another 400 benches. A second opinion says that Oisa Yom Nisrabu Shiva meya safsli bebeis hamedrash. 700 benches in the Beis Hamedrash.
That's what the time of Hillel you went to the roof.
This is a different story. No, this is a different story. Yeah, this is much later. So much later. So this is much later. This is Gamliel is how many generations of Hillel? I mean, there's many generations. So and even if Gamliel was in the Beis Medrash and he felt bad, maybe he did the wrong thing, and then he had a dream, and they made him feel good, but really it wasn't true. Really, he was the Rebbe Elazar Mazai was right. Okay, that's a story in the Gemara. So the shaila is, when the wife said, "You don't have a white beard," what did she mean? That she was just like being like very superficial. She was saying, you don't have a long frock, you don't have a big up hat, you don't have the white beard. No one's gonna get up for you. I look like a young kid. Doesn't make sense. Chas v'sholom. That's not what she meant. She meant very simple. The Ein Chochem Kabbalah Nesoyim. The pasuk says, "Reiv shanim yidio chochma." A man of age has wisdom that comes with age. The Chazal say, "Harba kebaltem eraboy say harba kebaltem etalmidem mechavera metalmidei yosem kulam." There is what a person gets from his rabbis, is what a person gets from his friends, what a person gains from his students. All that is not available to a 16 or 17-year-old. He might be brilliant, but he doesn't have all that.
I mean, the years. He doesn't have the years.
He doesn't have the years.
Also play life experience.
What does it? Life experience. He doesn't have all that. He can have incredible kishroinus. He can be a maspid. He can be brilliant. You see that. You see young people, they're brilliant. But they don't match up with people that are maybe, they don't have the strongest wisdom, but they have wisdom of life.
Let's say if somebody has high IQ, it will be sugar.
But that's something else. No. You have young people who are not meshuggah and very smart and very wise, but still it doesn't come to the wisdom of an old man. Zikna tamid chachamim. So that's what the wife said to him. You're lacking that. So what? So and it couldn't be otherwise. The days of Reb Gamliel, all the Talmidim were toichem kebarim. So you think they will respect someone that always shows up with the white beard? He went to the Purim store and he showed up with the white beard. Yesterday he didn't have a white, today he's white. All going to get up for him? No. That doesn't make sense. And these people were toichem gebarim. They weren't impressed for something on the outside. Mm-hmm. So, toichem gebarim. The inside is like the outside.
They're very firm.
So there has to be that the pshat is that really the Elazar ben Azariah knew, and those that appointed him knew that he has that wisdom. But it wasn't. You couldn't see it on the outside. So how did the Rebbeinu Shalom show? The Rebbeinu Shalom showed through a miracle. Toichik about his inside is like his outside. The Eibusha showed that really he really is. He has the wisdom of a 70-year-old, like that Izal said. That was then put together with the first Gilgul and this Gilgul, he was really 70 years old. That's what that Izal says.
So
therefore,
what's his wife got up the next morning? She's 16 years old and she had an old man next door. What she was?
Feel bad for her, huh?
I feel bad.
Yeah, exactly.
No, he had a young face with a white beard.
Young,
not that bad.
but old in knowledge.
Right.
So he was
So younger woman with a vice and poor.
Yeah, but he had a nivus, so he didn't answer anything. But and the Eibishter showed it, right? That and now it came out to the surface that everyone could see.
It was just like
So the question is, how did he really have all this chachma at the age of 17? The answer is because he was Dor Asiri LeEzra, because he was 10 generations to Ezra, so he really had it. Like Chazal say that Av Zoichel Ben B'Chochma, Ben is Doimel to Teva Av. It's a din in the Av, a din in the Ben. The father has a schos to have a son like the father, the child. So there was something in there. So therefore, there was something in his yichus that came out that all of a sudden showed in his white hairs of the beard that really he connected. All of a sudden, that wisdom that was there in concealment was revealed. And the Rebbe made a miracle to show that it's really there. So therefore, the Elazar ben Azariah says, a moshel. He says that the Torah says, Acharei Mos, not the Vaviu. No. What does the Torah say? Acharei Mos? Shnei bnei Adam. Why doesn't it say Acharei Mos, not the Vaviu? They didn't die because they were not the Vaviu. They died because they were Shnei bnei Adam. Because there were two sons of Adam. They died because it was like father, like son. It was a teva they had from their father to be choilas ava to the Eibishter. So they couldn't hold themselves back and they ran into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Omar Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah understood that there's such a thing that goes from father to son that is very powerful. If you see it in the son, it must come from the father. You see it in the Avihu, it must come from Aaron. And that's what he was medayik in the Lashon HaPosuk. That's why the Pasuk doesn't say Acharei Mos Nodav Avihu. Acharei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron. They died because they were the sons of Aaron and they got it from daddy. He had a Cholos Ava, they had a Cholos Ava. So therefore, Omar Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah understands this syndrome. He understands this thing. And Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says that a moshul from a doctor and a choila, that the Cholos Ava is such a burn. And the person who's burning wants the coal. That's why the moshul is very good for the nimshul.
What would you bring to someone who would tell you that when it said Ba'alotecha Tenerot, that he was so filled with his blood, that he would just stand there and have the ability to just
Right, that was the chiddush shaloi shina.
Yeah.
Right, that's the chiddush shaloi shina. But leave that in a second aside. But the Rebbe says here, Moedik thing. If you think about this, what's the lesson that we could take? Is a double lesson. The Eibishter wants two things that always the impossible of a Jew. That the Eibishter wants two things. The Eibishter wants every Jew should have, on the one hand, a yearning to jump into the Kodesh. It's true that the Eibishter, it should be that against our will that we go into the mundane world and that we deal with mundane stuff. But our burning passion, our desire should be run into the Kodesh. We only want to stay in the place of Kodesh, of holiness. At the same time, we know that the Eibishter tells us, Al Yoveh b'chalais ala Kodesh. A Jew can't spend his whole life and close himself up in the place of Kodesh. He has to go into the place of Choil. There's a select time when he goes into the Kodesh. And here there's a tension. It's like the Sifri says, She'ein locha ava b'mokem yida v'yida b'mokem ava. Usually a person, the nature is that you're this way or the other way. You're a man of ava or you're a man of yida. You can't have both together. So the Sifrei says it only exists ba'avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'lavad. When it comes to the Eibishter, a Jew is expected to have ava and yid at the same time, even though they're two opposites. Here we expect of a Jew two opposites. In the one hand, there should be a burning desire, choilas ava, to go away from the mundane and only be in the place of kodesh. Never mind work, never mind goyim, never mind goyishkeit, never mind the world, never mind the workplace, never mind Wall Street and Main Street. I'm not interested in all those stuff. I'm not interested in the news. I don't care what's going on in the world. I want to know what's going on in Lekuti Torah, and I want to know what's going on in Shas and the Memra Ba'avarova and Aschad Rababa. That's what I want to know. That's it.
And then
there is the same time. There's a tziva v'ayove b'chaleis al kodesh that he has to go out and to make a dir lois baruch b'tachtonim in the world. And this thing is very hard. The tension between the two things. Therefore, the Eibishter says that this, in order for you to have both, there's the two opposites. That's when you're an individual. But therefore, the Eibishter says that this has to be veidaber Hashem el Moshe. That there is tzaddikim like Moshe Rabbeinu. That they give the koyach to a yid, because if I stand with my own koyach, it's very hard to have these two opposites. But the Eibishter, opposites of the Eibishter is no big deal. Noisafochim. But the Eibishter is noisafochim. So therefore the Eibishter gives us tzaddikim like Moshe Rabbeinu, that that Moshe Rabbeinu helps us, that we should be able to have these two, this tension, these two opposites at the same time. On the one hand, we have a burning desire to be close to the Eibishter. At the same time, we go out to the place of Choil, and we make a dir lois baruch